There you go.
Good evening, folks. Couple of minutes late. Do apologise for that, but we're here. We're here. So, Sarah. So tonight we are joined again by Mr. Top. I was going to say Top Hat Tales. It's not Top Hat Tales. It's Top Hat Tours. Mr. Pendle himself, Simon. Sorry, I'm doing well tonight, isn't I?
How many times have you introduced the pair, man?
I know, and I do apologise, Simon, for messing up your intro. Simon's back.
No.
Simon's having camera problems, but he's still here, and we can still hear him, which is the main thing. So tonight we're not going to be talking about Pendle. Simon has got new stories for us, even we don't know what they are. So it's going to be, we're really looking forward to this one. So thanks very much for coming back, Simon. Hope you're doing well.
My pleasure, Scott. My pleasure.
How's the weather in Pendle?
It's been pretty chilly just lately, but also very wet as well, really.
We've had the same. Our temperature in the last week has kind of just plummeted. Yeah. We actually had snow last week.
We did last Saturday.
That must be the first time in about 7 years. We've actually had, it wasn't very much, it was just a little bit, but it's still snow. I made an attempt at making a snowman, which wasn't really the best. I put a picture on the page, but it's been a long time since I attempted to build a snowman, so that
was all right until the wind flattened it.
Then my daughter decided just to demolish it for me, which was good after all my hard work. Anyway, enough of me blabbing on. Over to Simon, who's got some new stories for us. So whenever you're ready, Simon, if you want to take it away, young man.
Thank you very much indeed, Scott. Well, for this next story, we're going to go to a very, very beautiful place called Samlesbury Hall. And we're going to turn the clock back to 1923. And Samlesbury Hall has been earmarked for demolition. Now, on the 11th hour, the Samlesbury Hall Preservation Society are formed, and they consist mainly of historians and entrepreneurs, and they've saved the building. Now, a lot of renovation needs to take place, and they can't let any Tom, Dick and Harry work in Samlesbury Hall. It's got to be someone who's highly skilled in medieval buildings. Mm-hmm. One such person who fitted the bill beautifully was a gentleman called, and wait for his name, Mr. Michael Palin. No relation to our Monty Python star whatsoever. Michael had worked on Bodelwyddan Castle in North Wales. He'd worked in Bramhall in Cheshire. He'd worked in Muncaster in Cumberland and Horlith Wood in Bolton. He knew his stuff. He was employed by the Preservation Society to renovate the hall. He arrived on a beautiful June day, 1923, with his 4 apprentices. And he gave each apprentice a different part of the hall to work on. He chose an area known simply as the parlour. He got a ladder, he climbed up the ladder and looked at the roof, which was in a very, very bad state of decay. He got a hammer and chisel and chiselled away at some old and eroded stone and knocked a huge block of stone off. As he watched the stone fall down towards the earth, he was horrified to see a little boy standing at the bottom of the ladder with large black curly hair. He shouted, "Look out, lad!" The little boy just stood there. The stone grazed his nose and landed right in front of his toes. Michael came down that ladder, through this ladder, real piece of his mind, but the role was reversed and the little boy shouted, "You shouldn't be here. You've got no right to be here." "Well, I've got a right to be here. You stand back, lad. You could have been badly injured." Michael turned round, climbed up the ladder. The little boy had gone. Strange. He must be a quick runner. For the next 4 months, they worked their socks off, bringing new timber, new tiles, and the hall was beginning to look a bit like its former self once again. They arrived as usual for another hard day's graft on a bitterly cold December day, 1923. Michael looked out of the main windows of the hall and noticed that the blue sky had disappeared, replaced by clouds absolutely full of snow. Heavy, heavy snow came down from the heavens, and a howling wind seemed to whip up, circling right round the old hall. The temperature dropped dramatically. Michael got the 4 boys from upstairs into the main hall and said, "Look, boys, I'm sorry, There's no way we'll get home tonight. Just look at the snow up there. All the roads will be covered in snow. We'll have to spend the night here. The 4 apprentices complained bitterly. It was getting towards Christmas and they did need to get home. Anyhow, Michael got his timepiece out and said, look, it'll be dark by 4 o'clock, boys. Let's make our way into the forest, get lots of firewood, and keep this fire going all night. Well, it was dark by 4 o'clock, but they'd managed to get out into the open, into the local forest, and came back with tree trunks, with branches and twigs, and got a beautiful roaring fire going. Now, this is 1923. You've got no television, no radio. All you've got really is a good night's sleep. The 4 boys got their bedrolls and they rolled them out in a nice, neat line in front of the fire. And they fell into a deep sleep. Michael got his bedroll, unravelled it, and sat next to the apprentices and had a few words with the good Lord upstairs. Halfway between his prayers, he became aware of a golden, glowing light in the side of the room that really caught his attention. It was almost like a large yellow orb, if you will. Suddenly, out of that yellow light appeared a very, very beautiful young lady in Tudor dress, and she very elegantly made her way past Michael towards the fireplace where the 4 apprentices were sleeping. She put her hand on top of the fireplace and she talked, and Michael heard her utter the words, "I pray my husband will survive this war." She then shimmered, disappeared, but left a very, very sweet scent in the air. Michael's heart accelerated in his chest. His mouth went dry. He then gingerly turned to the right again to look into the corner of the room once again, when he saw another golden glowing orb. And out of that orb appeared a typical 1642 Cavalier officer, bandoliers across his chest, a goatee beard, feathers in his cap, and he walked straight through the apprentices. He too put his hand on top of the mantelpiece, and Michael heard him utter the words, "I will survive this campaign." He also shimmered and disappeared. By now, Michael, from his vantage point, is getting very, very traumatized. He gingerly, nervously turned to the right for the 3rd time and saw a much smaller glowing light. And out of that glowing light suddenly appeared the little boy with the curly black hair that had escaped being hit by the stone in June of that year whilst Michael was renovating the actual hall. The little boy ran past Michael, through the sleeping apprentices, and out of the wall opposite. As you can imagine, Michael did not sleep very well that night, but quite surprisingly, when the 4 boys woke up, he didn't tell them. He told no one. When he got back to his wife and children in nearby Darwin, he didn't tell them either. He told no one. But some 18 years later, at the height of World War II, as a very, very elderly gentleman, he was walking past the hall, as he had done on many occasions, just to admire his handiwork, when he saw parked outside a military vehicle belonging to the Royal Air Force. And he thought, RAF, what are they doing here? He walked across the lawns. He got to the main entrance. And as he looked for the windows and the door frame, he could see 2 Royal Air Force personnel in that very room where he'd seen those characters all those years ago. He entered the room. The 2 Royal Air Force personnel turned. One was a female and one was a male. He stared at the young girl in the Royal Air Force uniform, and she looked very embarrassed, as you can imagine. "Can I help you?" she said. Her companion, the officer, intervened. "Can we help you, please?" Michael recognized the girl in the Royal Air Force uniform to be the same beautiful young lady he had seen walk out of that golden glowing light in 1923. And he told her. She burst into tears. "Mr. Palin, I don't disbelieve a word you've told me, but I am from the city of Leicester. I've never been to Lancashire in my life before. But as we drove past, I shouted, 'Stop, stop, stop. I know this place. I've been here before. And you, Mr. Palin, have just answered my anxieties.'" Some years ago, I conducted the guided tour at Samlesbury Hall, and I met that lady. She told me she was in her 80s for that period of time, which would have been about right, really. She opened a handbag and she brought out a photograph of herself in 1943, taken at that very fireplace. She reminded me very, very much of the Hollywood or Pinewood actress, Deborah Kerr. She could have passed for a double. You can always tell when someone's being very honest with the story, and it married in beautifully with the history of Samlesbury Hall. And you can get a booklet on the history of Samlesbury Hall, and there you'll find a photograph of the girl in the Royal Air Force uniform. Quite a touching story, that one, Scott.
It is. It's quite. It's quite touching. It's quite strange as well. I mean, I've heard, I think we've all heard the people who have lived before, past lives and what have you, came back again, and they'll meet someone, or they'll go somewhere. It's happened to me. I'm not saying that I've lived before or anything, but you went to a place and you think, I've been here before, and different streets and what have you. Even though you've never been there in your life, you recognise different kind of streets. I dare say it's happened to you,
It's almost like a kind of deja vu effect, though, isn't it? You've not been to that place, but there's something in your head saying, no, like, you've been here, you've done this, even though you haven't.
I have not been. So, the lady in the Tudor dress at the fireplace, any idea who she was?
No, no idea, but it is well recorded that Palin saw her, and certainly the girl in the Royal Air Force uniform, I did actually meet her, and she was in her 80s then, but she certainly was a very, very attractive lady for a woman in her 80s. She was almost like a film star, if you will.
Mm. Kate's asking, did the lady in question have any different relation to the Tudor lady?
She looked exactly the same. That's what Palin said. She looked exactly the same. She could have been the sister or indeed the same person, Scott, which is quite amazing, really.
It's these kind of things. I mean, when you get, we've all heard people telling stories, and some of them seem kind of far out. You think, you're talking rubbish. But it's when you get genuine people that tell you, and I think you can always tell when somebody's telling you the truth. About
yes.
something like paranormal related, and that, because they sound surprised themselves. You can tell it's no rehearsed or anything what they're telling you, if that makes sense. And it's quite a weird one. So is it possible that the Tudor lady and the Tudor gentleman, the Cavalier guy, this was a husband she was referring to, and the little boy, could have been their son? I wonder if it's inherent memory. She's actually a distant relative. I mean, we all know Salisbury Hall is very, very famous, and it dates back hundreds of years. We did a show on it. Was it earlier on this year, Simon? We covered Salisbury Hall yourself. Because you get Salisbury witches as well, and the story of the hand.
Very much so, yes. Yeah.
What was found there. So there's a lot of history. Well, as if I'm telling you, you know the building inside out, basically, and there's loads of history. It's a place we'd love to go down and actually visit. Who knows, maybe next year.
Yeah.
It definitely sounds like there is some kind of connection to.
I would say so, Scott. I mean, she couldn't work. She'd driven past in a staff car in 1943, and she told the driver to stop because she knew the place. She felt she'd been here before, and then seeing Palin actually confirm his side of the story, and for the two of them to meet, it was quite unique, really. It more or less confirmed that, as Kate said, that she could have been reincarnated. It's quite possible.
But I mean, also you've done a lot of tours and what have you in the hall itself. Is there any? I can't say it. I can't even watch it. Has there ever been any more reported sightings of these three, spirits, people, whatever you want to call them?
Not those three. It's The regular ghost there will be the White Lady, Lady Dorothea Southworth. And her story is actually very, very sad. I think we may mention before in the programme, she's known as the White Lady of Salisbury. And she's called Lady Dorothea. Again, we turn the clock back to the 1680s. And one day she made her way into the local forest very, very near the hall and came across a very handsome young lad called D. Horton from a place called Horton Towers, which is an equally gorgeous building. It was love at first sight. Boy meets girl, girl meets boy. But in this case, landowner meets landowner. It was love at first sight, but huge problem for Lady Dorothea. When she got back to the hall, her father was absolutely furious. We're Catholics. They're Protestants. You will never, ever see him again, lass. If you do, I'll have you banished. You live with the nuns of the south of France. We are Catholics. They are Protestants. He'll never have my permission to take your hand in marriage. The poor girl was deeply upset. And if anything, it fueled their love. And in the dead of night, she would make her way into the forest to meet young D. Horton. Her father warned her for the last time, if you continue with this relationship, I promise you, I'll have you sent to Marseille to live with the nuns. We are Catholics. They are Protestants. He then told her two brothers, tonight, boys, do what's necessary. On a beautiful moonlit night, Dorothea left her bed. She tiptoed past what she thought were her sleeping brothers and sleeping parents. She made her way across the manicured lawns of Salisbury Hall, over the bridge on the moat, and out towards the forest. There, surrounded in bright, bright moonlight, was young D. Horton. When he saw her, he very, very politely bowed. He affectionately kissed her hand. He reached into his pocket and produced a huge engagement ring with gems from that period of time. He proposed to her, and she gratefully accepted the proposal of marriage, knowing full well her family would ostracize her. They hugged each other in the moonlight on the fringe of the forest, and then they heard shouting, hysterical shouting and swearing, and out of the forest appeared Dorothea's two brothers, both armed with two very sharp knives. They cruelly, maliciously murdered young D. Horton right in front of her. Poor Dorothea's heart was snapped in two. The tears streamed down her cheeks as she was brought back into the chapel and placed under house arrest at Salisbury Hall. The following morning, she made the long, long journey to the south of France. On arriving there, she never drank again, she never ate again, and she never slept again. And she died literally of a broken heart. All she had on her lips was the name of young D. Horton. That's when the famous sightings of the White Lady of Salisbury have taken place. She's been seen by many, many people throughout the centuries. I'm going to use just two stories relating to her because we'll be here till midnight, otherwise, Scott. But one story which I did find very, very intriguing took place in 1878 when in nearby Blackburn, nearby Preston, we had what's called textile riots. And the army were called in to handle this rather alcohol-fueled textile riots. The regiment chosen was the 24th Regiment, the South Wales Regiment. And Lieutenant Colonel John Pilley, the South Wales Regiment, had just toasted the regiment and said, right, gentlemen, we should retire for the night. In the early hours of the morning, he was woken by sobbing, and he thought, that's strange, not one of my men. Sounds like a female to me. He got dressed very quickly. He opened the curtains and looked into the grounds of Salisbury Hall, and there, illuminated in bright moonlight, in between the horse chestnut and the yew tree in the grounds of Salisbury Hall, he could clearly make out the shape of a female with a long white gown that looked to be very, very distressed. He rushed downstairs, ran across the lawns, and shouted, Mom, Mom, may I be of assistance to you, Mom? The figure slowly turned. Where there should have been a face was a hollow, dark cavity. The colonel screamed. He was no coward. He had taken the life of many a Russian soldier in the Crimean Wars, but the poor lad was horrified. He rushed back into the building, ran upstairs and searched frantically for his British Army regulation. hip flask, and consumed the contents. The following morning, he had breakfast the Harrison family, and they laughed. "Oh, Colonel, don't worry. You've seen the White Lady. She's been with us since 1684. The Colonel had no idea, but he was going to meet her personally. His regiment, the 24th, some 8 weeks later, was sent to South Africa, where they joined Lord Chelmsford's ill-fated No. 3 column and invaded Zululand. There on the 22nd of January, 1879, beneath a rocky outcrop in Natal State called Isandwana, King Katsuwe, the Zulu king, unleashed his Zulu impis on the 24th Regiment that had bivouacked beneath the crest of the hill. They were wiped out to a man. The colonel formed a square with the remnants of his brigade and toasted the White Lady of Salisbury before he succumbed to the Zulu assegai. In 1926, a most important find took place, which seemed to answer a lot of questions. The road next to the hall was widened to take more heavier traffic, and they put what's called a herringbone drainage system across the lawns of Salisbury Hall, and one of those ditches went in between the horse chestnut and the yew tree. And just 2 feet beneath the surface, they found the foot of an adult skeleton. Blackburn CID were brought in, and the sergeant in charge of the excavation removed more soil from the actual grave and said, "Definitely a murder. I don't think we'll catch the culprit. This lad's been here for at least 400 years. More soil is taken from the grave, and they find on one of the skeleton's fingers a beautiful, beautiful ring. The ring is carefully cleaned, carefully inspected, and had the engraving inside, Dorothea D. Horton. It was none other than young D. Horton, and that would explain why the White Lady of Salisbury will go to the grave of the only boy that ever showed her any love, any warmth, and any affection. I personally have never seen the White Lady of Salisbury. I've met police officers who have. I've met staff at Salisbury Hall who have. But I've never, ever seen her. But she's certainly quite a star when it comes to the stories of Salisbury Hall.
Kate's got a question there. She may have been pregnant as well, hence absolute heartbreak. I suppose that's possible. She could have been maybe shipping her off to France as well. It's a fascinating story, and you hear stories like this, it makes me wonder. I mean, going back to the Tudor lady and the gentleman, and then this lady as well, it makes you wonder. I mean, we've all heard, everybody's got a different theory of what happens after we pass. The loved ones come to meet us, and we all kind of live happily ever after, sort of thing. And there's all different theories. It makes you wonder why these people haven't connected after the past, how they've not found each other. There's a wee compliment for you there, Simon. After loving these stories, Simon is a legend.
That's very, very kind of Kate to say so.
Oh, yeah, you're well liked, Simon. Yeah, you're a very, very popular man.
Very nice to know that, Scott. Thank you.
But it makes you wonder why these people haven't connected up on the other side, whatever you want to call it.
Maybe they can.
So there's that leads to the question: do we meet up with loved ones on the other side? Is this why this White Lady's there and this Tudor lady's there? Is she still waiting? Is she even aware that she's passed on? Is she still waiting her husband coming home?
Maybe the tragic circumstances in life, though, is stopping them from being together in death.
Possibly. At least it's so many questions, if that makes sense, Simon.
Yeah.
And you could go on forever. You could actually melt your brain with a amount of questions. Kate's asking, any luck on the audiobook, Simon?
No, I've had no luck at all, I'm afraid, Scott. I'm not really a technical person, which probably explains why I can't get my picture up on the StreamYard, really. I've got lots of stories actually recorded, a lot of stories recorded, but I don't have the actual know-how on how to get them onto an audio book. It's the technical side which is really stopping me, actually, Scott. But I'm adding to my stories all the time, really. Got a whole battery on the laptop, of course. But when I look at stories, Scott, I like to meet eyewitness accounts. I find they're the best ones. And you can always tell when someone is, shall we say, making a bit of fun or telling a story from the heart. And this next story, we are getting towards Christmas, of course, is very, very much a Christmas ghost story. But it's the experience of a marvellous chap who I met many years ago called Billy Lakin. And through the local tourism office at Blackburn, I organised a tour, but I needed some stories to make the tour pretty good, really. And a few people came to see me. One of them was a chap called Billy Lakin, and Billy's story was quite magnificent, really. He came to my house. I made him a cup of coffee. He sat down in front of the fire. He reached into his jacket and produced a photograph of some 57 young men, all in British Army uniform. On the back of the photograph was everyone's name, beautifully, neatly written, and the word September 1939, Clitheroe Territorial Army. He said we had the photograph taken. We then made our way down to the railway station. We made our way down to the south of England, across the English Channel, to a place called the Maginot Line, French fortifications. We were told by the French that the Germans will never, ever, ever get through the Maginot Line. It's impregnable. And for 10 months, we'd walk up and down the Maginot Line, and we did come across some German troops that it was really called the phony war, really. I remember exchanging British cigarettes for German cigarettes, British bully beef for German stew, etc. It's as if no one really wanted to start the war, really. But this all changed on the 10th of May, 1940, when the Germans launched what we now call Blitzkrieg, Lightning War. Bill remember that day very well, the 10th of May 1940. He was told by his officer, right boys, leave all the equipment. We're going to Dunkirk. They left all their equipment behind, and he said it wasn't really a march, but a run, which took them 4 days and 4 nights to get from the Maginot Line to the port of Dunkirk. And he remembered as he entered Dunkirk, the whole town was on fire. There was black smoke going down the beach there. And when he finally got to the beaches, he was greeted by over 300,000 British Expeditionary Force men, all huddled together on the beach and in the sand dunes. Now, his feet were nearly red raw with blisters because he had run all the way from the Maginot Line, and he sat down on a sand dune, took his tin helmet off, and used it as a shovel. He made a small slit trench in the side of the sand dune. He took his boots off and his gaiters and his socks and climbed into the little foxhole and fell into a deep sleep. He was so exhausted, he slept through 4 air raids. After 8 hours of continuous sleep, he was woken up by his corporal and told, right, lads, it's our turn to be evacuated. They made their way down to the water's edge in a long, long line with water lapping around their shoulders when a German aircraft came down the beach, opened fire, and they dived under the water. When Bill came to the surface, the sea was crimson red with the blood of his mates. He then felt a very strong hand grab his battle-dress tunic, and he was pulled on board a small rowing boat by a Royal Naval rating, and then rowed out to a Royal Naval destroyer, where he received the finest meal he's ever had, the first food in 6 days, and that was a corned beef sandwich and a mug of tea, followed by a delicious Woodbine cigarette. He got to Dover, and when he got to Dover, he couldn't find any of his mates at all, but an officer said, look, we know where you'd come from. You don't need a ticket. Get on the next train to your battalion headquarters. In his case, that was St. Mary's Church office in Clitheroe, a bit like a territorial army hall, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
He remembered getting the train from Dover up to London, London to Preston, then the small branch line from Preston to the little market town of Clitheroe, where he lived. The train stopped in some sidings for a short time to take on more water. He looked out of the side of one of the coaches and saw a game of cricket taking place. And he thought, how lovely is that compared to where I've just come from? He got to his hometown of Clitheroe, and he could have gone straight home to his mum and dad's house, but he was told to go to the battalion headquarters, which was St. Mary's Parish Church Hall. He said he limped. He didn't walk, but he limped all the way from the railway station to the St. Mary's Hall due to the blisters on his feet. He opened the door, and out of the 57 young men that had gone with him, only 18 had got back, including himself. They were told there and then to make up the numbers to platoon strength once again. In those days, if you were 18, you were conscripted, but if you were 17, you could join up, but you did have to have your mother and father's consent, and both parents had to sign what's called a consent form. Now, Bill was 18, he had a young friend who was 17, and this young boy said, "Oh, Bill, go and see me mum and dad. Get them to sign this consent form. I want to fight for my country." Bill saw this young boy's parents, and they said, "Sorry, he's our only son. The war could be over next year anyway. Oh, please, mum, please, dad. I want to fight for my country." They gave in on one condition, that condition being that Bill would look after him like a brother, and he swore he would do. So the young lad did his military training, and the newly formed Clitheroe platoon was sent to the beautiful Greek island of Crete to make up the defence there, along with the Australian and New Zealand armed forces. On the 21st of May, 1941, the Germans once again launched a highly disciplined airborne invasion by using glider-borne infantry and what's called Fallschirmjäger, German paratroopers, the very cream of the German forces. The fighting in Crete was quite ferocious. The New Zealanders, in particular the Maoris, put up quite a stiff defence, but they had no air cover, ammunition restrictions, and the Germans took the island. In the fighting, the Clitheroe platoon lost 11 men killed, one of them being the 17-year-old young boy. Bill was absolutely heartbroken, and from his POW camp in Poland, he would write back through the Red Cross this young boy's parents, just simply begging their forgiveness. They wrote back to him saying, "We do not hold you personally responsible for the death of our son, but Bill did." When he came back to his native town of Clitheroe, he was never the same man. He never smiled, he never joked. This young boy's death seemed to haunt him every single day. But things were going to change on the 24th of December, 1968, Christmas Eve, when he made his way to the old church hall to watch the Clitheroe Amateur Operatic Society's Christmas play, which was indeed a Christmas carol. He was the very last person to leave the building, and he lit a cigarette. As he smoked the cigarette, his mind went back to his wartime experiences, and he looked at the wall and thought of those 57 young men where that photograph was taken in 1939. He took a deep sigh, and he extinguished the cigarette with his foot. He then made his way to the left of the building to make a turn down a long, narrow ginnel onto what's called York Street. As he turned, he heard three whispers. "Hey, Bill! Hey, Bill! Hey, Billy!" Bill turned round and saw the ghost of the young lad standing just yards from him, wearing British Army uniform. The first thing Bill noted was the boy had not aged a day. He looked exactly as he had done on Crete in 1941. The boy rose his ghostly arm and said, "Bill, don't worry about me, Bill. I'm fine. I'm fine, Bill. Don't worry about me." With that, Billy's knees gave way. He knelt on the cobblestones in that ginnel that Christmas Eve with tears down his cheeks. He said he almost yelped in emotional pain. He looked up, the boy turned, smiled, and vaporized. It took Bill some 30 minutes before he got off his knees and started to walk again. And as he walked through Clitheroe that happy Christmas Eve, past the happy Christmas revellers, the last thing he felt was celebrating anything. He was deeply traumatized by what he'd just seen. However, he got into bed that night and was woken by the bells of the nearby churches, St. James, St. Paul's, and St. Mary's. He got out of bed feeling totally different. He made his way to the bathroom. He opened the bathroom door and caught his reflection in the shaving mirror. He looked again and again and saw a change in his facial appearance. He noted for the first time since 1941 he was actually smiling. I will never forget Bill's words that left my house that day. He said, "Simon, I never believed in ghosts until I saw one with my own eyes." Bill died a good 15 years ago. Because I knew him, I went to his funeral and I went to the interment at the cemetery. And the two elderly gentlemen by the grave there, I had a diplomatic word with both of them. And they said, "Oh, yes, we all got captured together on Crete." I mentioned the young boy, and they said, "Yes, Billy was looking after him. He sent him back to the ammunition truck, which had a metal tailgate to give him some protection. But a German sniper caught him in open ground from the slip trench to the actual ammunition truck." Of course, every November we buy poppies, of course, on Remembrance Sunday. And I always think of those two boys because their only crime in life really was to be born at the wrong time of the last century. My wife and I, we actually went to Crete for a holiday some 5-6 years ago. And I went to the Suva Bay Commonwealth War Graves, which has a lot of British boys, Australian, New Zealand lads in there. And what was quite touching, Scott, is one of the lads who worked there was from London. He was employed by the Commonwealth Graves, and he took me to exactly the right grave where this young lad, only 17, had been interned there, which I found quite amazing that he knew every single grave with that professional. A very sad story, but also a very true story.
It's sad, but it's a beautiful story. I'll just jump to these comment. Laura was saying maybe it's because they've done finished business here. Until they've finished, they feel they can. That is very, very possible.
Yes, yeah.
If earlier on, Kate saying, "Keep recording, Simon. We'll eventually get you online." Does Simon have a YouTube channel? We can put them on there.
Yes, I definitely do, Scott. I do have a YouTube channel, and you can see all these stories, and you can actually see my face as well. They come under Simon Entwistle, Tales from the Graves, and there's a whole array on YouTube. You can look at, Laura, which is you might enjoy those really.
Well, what I'll do is I'll look up on, because I've subbed to your channel anyway, and I'll put it up on our page so that folk can click on it and come in and see the handsome looks young man as well. You know what I'm saying?
I need an engineer, Scott. That's what I need.
Oh, I'm getting it myself. It comes to us all, young. It comes to us all. But we're still above ground. That's the main thing, isn't that right?
Yes. Yeah.
Simon, I could listen to you all day. You have a way of drawing you in, and the emotion comes over so genuine. That word there.
Genuine.
Aye, that word. And Kate's saying heartbreaking. It is a heartbreaking.
Yeah.
I take that's Laura slagging me. Laura's one of ours. Kate's also the girl who was on previously with you and I, Simon. It is a heartbreaking story. You think his friend, this young man, eventually just came back. We always say that spirit's always around us, watching us daily, but they'll never interfere or intervene in our lives unless they feel they really, really have to. A kind of last resort sort of thing. So maybe this young man saw, this guy was at the end of his rope. It was, and he just needed that wee boost, that wee bit of reassurance. Just so listen, mate, I'm fine. I'm still about. So don't stop kicking yourself in the backside, basically. If you know what I mean.
Yeah, it certainly gave him peace of mind, that's for sure. And he got back to his old ways once again because he felt he'd been truly forgiven for the death of this young boy all those years ago. Almost like the slate was cleaned again. The responsibility was taken from his shoulders. And it's good that it should come at Christmas time as well, of course.
Always at Christmas time, it's a nice time of year, but for a lot of people, it's a bad time of year, for all different kind of reasons.
Yeah.
Whether it be financial, family, or, they've lost a loved one in that time. And so Christmas does play, a big part in people's lives that way. And I think it becomes a lot worse at Christmas time. So maybe this gentleman was just about to be pushed over the edge because of the time of year that it was. Everybody around them happy, they're looking forward to Santa coming, whatever. And he's still got his friend right there on his mind, and his friend's seen this and thought, well, I'm going to intervene here. I've been watching you for X amount of time, but I'm going to come forward and just let you know that I'm okay. And so you say, the next morning he got up and it was the first time he'd smiled in God knows how long.
Yeah.
And I believe its spirit is around us, but they won't interfere. They won't intervene unless they really, really have to. I've seen this on shows before. There's times in everybody's lives where they'll have a problem or an issue and they can see no way out of it. And at the very last minute, a solution will pop up, and it solves the problem or it makes the problem easier. And I've always questioned, is that spirit, lending us a wee, giving us a wee helping hand sort of thing, a wee nudge in the right direction, or saying, here's a wee bit of help for you. I think some people might think I'm nuts thinking that way, but who knows, Simon? Do you know what I mean? It is possible.
Yeah, definitely.
So you think I'm right?
Aye.
So I'm not the only one that's nuts.
No.
That's what fascinates us about paranormal as well, and many other people. There's that many different questions. You know yourself, Simon. There's that many different questions out there.
Yes. Yeah.
And we might never answer them, or we might answer one or two, and the rest of the bag will stay empty.
I think unless somebody dies and goes and explores what actually happens next, and then somehow manages to come back to life and tell us, we're never actually going to know.
Very true.
The way, just a quick story. I've told this story many times before, but it's one of the weirdest things that ever happened to me was my dad. He passed in 1995, and he two wee chihuahuas. One was a lovable wee thing, the other one was a wee demon, basically. This thing had to be locked away in the kitchen whenever you were in, because it just went for everybody. And my dad passed at Sunday night, and I took my stepmom home, and she says, "You want a cup of coffee?" Whatever. I says, "That's fine." And I sat down at my dad's chair, which was a chair I'd never ever sat in, because obviously it was my dad's chair. It's a thing, it was my dad's chair. I'm not sitting in it, but I sat in his chair, and my stepmom went out of the kitchen, and she left the door open. And every time she'd done it before, she'd always shut the door. But she obviously, she's just lost her husband, and she left the door open, and this little thing came belting out. I thought that was my life over. I thought this thing's going to go for me. But it didn't. It jumped up my lap and couried in, snuggled into me. And I just sat there staring at it. I couldn't, and it was really, really weird. So that started me thinking, is that my dad telling this? I can't even mind the dog's name. I had a few names for it, but we're not going there. Is that my dad telling, Pooch here, he's okay, be his friend sort of thing? I don't know how I go into that story, but it's just one of these things.
You've got to tell the seatbelt story, not the dog story.
I'll leave that for another time. It's always like a simulation when we need it. Both spirit higher being can program to see certain things, change situations to help out.
Oh, that's a whole different ballgame, that.
Did you put the dog? No, I didn't put the dog in the washing machine, Kate, but thanks very much for asking. It's because I put my mum's cat in the washing machine. Which I'm not proud of. Sorry, Simon. Carry on, my man.
Very good. Well, let's carry on with a Christmas theme, but this is very much a Christmas ghost story once again. And we are going to turn the clock back now to 1642. And that's when the English Civil War started. Now, they say it was English, but it did involve Wales, Scotland and Ireland as well, of course. And the whole idea of the English Civil War was, of course, Parliament challenging the royal family for the right to rule this country. The country was actually split, and those people to fight for the king were known as royalists, and those for Parliament as parliamentarians. Now, there was a very, very wealthy gentleman in West Lancashire of the name of Gilbert de Horton, and he wrote to King Charles I and said, "Sir, I shall take Blackburn, I shall take Burnley, Nelson Cone, and Oswald Twistle by Christmas Day, sir." He was a very wealthy man, and he formed a huge army, and they set off. And they arrived at a place called Duke's Brow, which overlooked the town of Blackburn. They got all their cannon in a long line, and they opened fire on the town of Blackburn. Blackburn was quite fortunate to have two very high-ranking colonels, Colonel Shuttleworth and Colonel Starkey. And they dug a section of trenches around the town, and Starkey and Shuttleworth tell their men, "Right, boys, keep your heads beneath the parapet. We can expect an infantry attack at any minute." But nothing happened. What did happen is on top of Duke's Brow, a huge argument was taking place between Horton and his men. "Sir, we don't mind dying for you, sir. We don't mind dying for the king, sir. But it's Christmas Eve, sir. We should be with our wives and children, sir." Horton was livid. "I've paid you. I've clothed you. I've armed you. Attack Blackburn now." They refused. They about turned, and this huge army started to march towards what we call the Fyle Coast. In the meantime, Starkey and Shuttleworth thought, "Hey, they're retreating." And they caught the rear guard on top of Duke's Brow, where there was quite a few fatalities on both sides. And this was called the Battle of Duke's Brow. Now, that was actually the 24th of December, 1642. We're now going to go to a beautiful hot summer's day in 1995, and a lady who lives on top of Duke's Brow called Jeannie Halliwell. And Jeannie, to this very day, she runs a guest house. She had 6 children, they'd all left home, and she didn't fancy leaving the area, so she, to this very day, runs a very, very successful guest house. In 1995, beautiful summer's day, she made her way to the vegetable plot, and she put the fork into the soil, and she turned the soil over, when up came a cannonball. Up came some shrapnel, and up came a broken spur. Now, she knew all about the Battle of Duke's Brow and knew it happened, probably, where her garden was. She put the items in a seed tray, went inside the house, and the telephone rang, as it did on many occasions. On the end of the telephone was an Australian chap. "Hello there. Have you got a room for my wife and 3 kids? We're going to come over to Savo." "Yes, of course we have." "Right, I'll see you this afternoon," said the Australian. Around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the Australian family arrived, a mum, dad, 2 daughters. And Mrs. Halliwell said, "Just go to the front room. I'll make you all a cup of tea, and then I shall show you your rooms." She put the kettle on, and she heard hysterical shouting and screaming. A scream of pure terror coming from the front room. The Australian family came rushing down the corridor, actually elbowed her out of the way, jumped into their car, and reversed at great speed down the drive and out of the town of Blackburn. Now, Jeannie was quite horrified. She had never known such bad manners. She thought, "Oh no, has my dog made a mess in that front room?" She went to the front room and saw the settee on its side. She saw a lampshade on the floor, and she saw a painting hanging very, very awkwardly off the wall. She told the husband. Husband said, "Oh, don't worry, lass. Australians, very strange people." But she was really upset because she was proud of her hotel. She was proud of the guest house. And that night she received another telephone call from the same Australian from a place called Grasmere in the English Lake District. So sorry about leaving your house in such a hurry." "I should think so. What was the problem?" "Well, me wife's just got over it." "What do you mean your wife's just got over it?" "These soldiers came from the war right for me wife and 3 kids." "Soldiers?" said Jeannie. "Oh, yes, soldiers, red coats, goatee beards, feathers that kept right for me wife and 3 kids." Well, thanks for telling me, she said. She put the phone down, and it wasn't long before she got a telephone call from the Lancashire Evening Telegraph, and she'd tell them what had happened, and they also contacted the Australian family back in Brisbane, and they confirmed the story. It wasn't much longer when York University got involved, and they brought two York University professors to see Jeannie, and they sat with her, and they said, "What's happened to you, Jean? You've had Martindale syndrome." Martindale syndrome, what's that? Well, you were the first person to touch the cannonball, the first person to touch the shrapnel, and indeed the broken. And somehow you've opened a time warp into another era and another place. This is quite common. And they mentioned that way back in 1952, in the city of York, a young lad called Harry Martindale was working in a cellar behind the Minster, in a place called the Treasurer's House. He was in a cellar. You can imagine you've got a brick wall to your right, a brick wall to your left, and of course a ceiling above your head. His job was to install central heating. Harry was indeed a plumber's mate. He's up the ladder in the corner of the cellar. He's got a blowtorch. He's heating some copper piping to bend it, to insert it in the wall, when he hears the sound of a trumpet that got louder and louder. He suddenly glanced to the right, and to his real shock and horror, out of the brick wall in the cellar appeared a white horse with a Roman soldier actually on it that galloped past him through the opposite wall, followed by platoon after platoon of Roman infantry. Harry scuttled down the ladder and cowered in fear in the corner of the cellar. Then he suddenly realised, hey, they can't see me. They all looked to be deeply emaciated, really thin, slightly dark-skinned. But he could only see them to their knee joints. As the last Roman soldier went past him, the sound of the trumpet seemed to fade at the same time. Harry got to his feet. He rushed up the stairs into the treasurer's house, where his boss was also working upstairs, and told his boss what had happened. His boss said, "Look, Harry, you've got to finish this job. We're behind with the contract. I can't go down there again. Harry, I'm sorry. I'll have to sack you." And he was sacked that day. He rather sadly made his way for the centre of York, down a lovely street called Stonegate, and into the oldest public house in York called the Old Star Inn. He got to the bar, and as you can imagine, he ordered a very stiff drink. At the bar was a young lad from the York Evening Press, whose words were, "Here, mate, you look like you've seen a ghost." "Actually, I've seen about 85 this afternoon." "Oh, yeah? Tell me about it." He told him the story, and the York Evening Press journalist said, "Well, it's getting towards Halloween. I think we'll print that one." And they printed the story. When it was printed, the whole city of York laughed at Harry. They found his story hilarious. He was the butt of many a joke. But 2 weeks later, some more work had to take place inside the treasurer's house in the actual cellar. And there they found where Harry had seen his Roman soldiers, a beautiful Roman road. At the end of the Roman road, they saw a pillar with Roman numerals and the words Eboracum. Eboracum, of course, was the garrison of York. And that's when the professors had a word with him about what he'd seen. And they believed that Harry, just like Jeannie Halliwell in Blackburn, had somehow, with his blowtorch, with his copper piping, had somehow opened a time warp to another era and another time. Hence the name Martindale Syndrome.
Geez, I mean, a lot of people would just laugh at that, but when you find evidence to back it up, and you get more than one person, saying it happened to them, what have you. And I mean, the Roman, I know Chester. There's
Yes.
Romans seen there quite often, and the old, from the knees up, simply because back in their time, that's where the road was a lot lower. So it's the old walking through brick walls where there used to be a door kind of thing as well. But it's you wonder, is it possible to do that? To touch something from back then and actually open up a doorway, or would the spirits always? It's an interesting one.
It is a very interesting one, really, Scott. I know that when Harry explained these Roman soldiers, slightly dark-skinned, very thin, really emaciated, and some people believe that what Harry saw that day was the 9th Hispanic Legion leaving the city of York for Carlisle, and they were wiped out by the Celts and the Picts in the borders region of Scotland. It was the only time when a Roman legion has actually been defeated, and it must have been quite tough, those guys in the borders, I reckon, really. But he said that they weren't wearing what we call a Hollywood-type Roman uniform, but almost like a leather kilt with a skull cap, a round shield, and a spear, which would have been about right for that period of time.
Actually, we've all got the Hollywood image,
Yes, yeah.
I think that's what everybody expects. Well, this is what the Romans wore back in the day because I saw it in a film. But there would have been a different kind of dress, way the dress. Kate saying that's exactly what happened to my dad once. He said he was watching an old film, and he said even though it was real time and he was wide awake and present, it's a weird feeling. My dad saw his best friend's great aunt pinning her hat on in her dresser mirror, like a film that happened when he opened one of her boxes with a hat pin.
Fabulous.
Until after he spoke to his friend, about it. But again, it's a paranormal. There's that many questions, and time, opening doors to different time, eras and what have you.
Yes.
I dare say it is. We don't know. I don't know enough about it to give a kind of opinion. I do know. I mean, a lot of people lose time. It's happened to me. It happened to me in Greyfriars a few years back. I lost about 3 hours. And, I was sitting on a bench. It was in the afternoon. It was a Saturday afternoon, sitting on the bench in Greyfriars. And I know I never fell asleep or whatever, but I looked at my phone and it was like 5:30. And I'd been there for about 3. I thought maybe it was only about 2:30 or something. It was about 5:30. And I've no idea where, that time. I say 3 hours, it was roughly 3 hours. I've no idea where that time went, but it just went like that. And I know myself, I never nodded off or anything.
Are you sure?
I'm sure about that. Positive about that.
Were you just resting your eyes?
No, I wasn't resting. I was wide awake. That's the thing. And I was sitting. I thought maybe I'd only been there for about half. It didn't feel all that long. Then I looked at my phone and I thought, Jesus, I need to go for the bus. Where did the time come? But I mean, that's getting the sciencey side, the paranormal, which we don't do.
No, we're no.
We're not kind of. I'm not saying. Sarah and I are the sciencey people. We just prefer sort of plain and simple. But it does make you think. It does make you wonder. And when you think, where your house is built with that lady, isn't that a sign you're getting old, Scott? I'm saying nothing on that one. I mean, there's sites for that all over Britain. The one that springs immediately to mind to me. Also, you've got Culloden, Bannockburn, but the one that's popped into my mind when you were telling that story, Simon, especially with the lady in the house, there's a house up in Rob Royston, and we covered it last year. It was where William Wallace was captured by the English, and in August 13, I might get this, a board we get 1305, I think it was captured. It was 1305. But there's a row of houses, and it's the third house in, is the exact spot where the English grabbed them. And I've spoke to the Society of William Wallace when we're up there. Says, are the people in that house aware of what actually happened? Where their living room is, or whatever their house is. He says, I don't think they've got a clue that that's the actual spot where it was actually physically grabbed. And it just makes you wonder: is it possible that these events are still happening over and over again? And the lady in the house, as you say, unlocked a door.
Yeah, yeah.
That makes sense. See, I'm not great at the sciencey stuff
No, you're making sense.
because I'm too old for the sciencey stuff. You know what I mean?
Well, it's not our house. Our house was built on a field, so you kind of wonder, like, what was the field used for back in the day?
Aye, and that's the other question. I mean, way off track here, but it's a question that keeps popping out of my mind. I don't know if you'll agree with me or no, Simon, but you think all the people that's lived in the UK over the centuries, you know, you're talking millions of people,
Right?
right? You think, where have they all been buried? Does that make sense?
Aye, I suppose.
I know it might be a kind of stupid question, but it's one of these things that pop into your head, you know,
yeah.
Because there's not enough cemeteries to hold everybody.
Aye, I mean, you look at Greyfriars, there's what 500,000 people is estimated to be built. Your house was built on a dairy farm that was around in the 1940s. Yeah, that's what we love. Same as yourself, Simon, the history, you know, of the land and what have you, and what went on here before, etc. And you just don't know.
Well, without history, there is no paranormal.
Well, no, that's
Very true. Yeah.
Sorry, Simon, I interrupted you again.
No problem at all, Scott. No, it's good to have a chat, really. But there are some quite fabulous stories out there, really. And again, I'd like to bring in almost like a winter's type tale here, really. It's quite unique, really. It's not so much a ghost story, this really, but it's very much into the mystery, really. When you look at the Jack the Ripper murders in Spitalfields in Whitechapel, there were many suspects. One was an American called Dr. Tumblety. Another was a chap called William Gull. He was the Queen's physician. There was Aaron Kosminski, James Druitt, but also a chap called Stephen Thompson, and he came from Preston in Lancashire. Now, Thompson was a bit of a character, really, because he was a bit of a ladies' man, but we do know that whenever there was a murder committed by what we now call the Whitechapel murderer, he was actually in the town itself, really. And when Polly Ann Nichols was murdered way back in September 1888, he was actually in Bucks Row, which is very near the murder scene, really. Mm-hmm. When Margaret Chapman was murdered at Berners Street on the 7th of September, he was there as well. And also when Elizabeth Long and Catherine Edwards were murdered on the 30th, he was actually in the city. And when Margaret Kelly was murdered on the 7th of November 1888, he was also in the city as well. But Scotland Yard did in fact track him. And 2 years later, he was actually arrested in Clitheroe and sent down to what's called the Seaside Resort Home, which was run by Scotland Yard. And there they had all the witnesses. There was Elizabeth Long, there was Israel Schwarzer, Louis Dumschultz, and John Levi, William Harrison, George Hutchinson. But they couldn't formally identify him because two of them had two different descriptions. One was a man wearing a deerstalker hat with sandy-coloured hair. The other was a gent with a top hat, a white cape, and a cane. So it just seems to, put a lot of mystery in the story. But when you look at the Whitechapel murders, there were two letters sent. One was to the Central News Agency, and another was sent to a person called the James Lusk, and he was indeed the organiser of the Whitechapel Vigilantes. And in 2000, DNA was actually discovered. And someone said, hey, we got these letters in the Scotland Yard Museum. We just need to look at the DNA in the back of the stamps, these two letters. And they did do. And would you believe, Scott, through modern technology, they traced the DNA back to the 1888 postmistress at Spitalfields Post Office, which I think is absolutely amazing. She would have probably seen what we now call Jack the Ripper without knowing it. She just literally licked the stamp and put it in the back of the envelope and posted it. But that in itself is quite a mysterious story, really, isn't it?
That is. We've covered, well, Sarah's covered Jack the Ripper with Richard Jones on.
I'm sure, yes, yeah.
Simon's covered it for
I was just going to say we covered it with yourself. Sarah's the Ripper girl. I don't mean physically, she's killing people, but she's a Ripper expert. It is a fascinating story, and there's that many suspects to the murders.
Oh yeah, a lot of suspects, yeah.
That was H.G. Holmes as well. I've got that right.
H.H. Holmes.
H.H. Holmes, sorry. He was a big suspect because also he went to America and he murdered people there, is that right?
The murder castle type thing. I'm pretty sure he was ruled out though.
So there's that many, and then obviously a lot of the documentation was destroyed in a fire.
Yes.
Well.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think Jack the Ripper must be the UK's first serial killer. Maybe I can't think of anybody before him that would kind of.
Yeah, I think what's quite amazing is that he was obviously a professional killer, really, because he seemed to do it without making any noise whatsoever, really. And in the case of the Mitre Square murder of Catherine Eddowes, the police officer was actually patrolling the actual square, PC William Kenyon. The murder was taking place whilst his back was turned, and he heard absolutely nothing. And it took him 7 minutes to walk around Mitre Square. And when he came round, he found her lying flat on her back with organs that had been removed, terribly mutilated. But what seemed to fascinate everyone is that these organs were removed professionally by someone who knew what he was looking for. Things like uteruses are removed, kidneys removed, etc. And George Lusk actually had a kidney sent to him from presumably the murderer. It was a human kidney, definitely, and which makes the whole story quite fascinating in itself, really.
So would that lean towards it being some kind of maybe doctor or medical to be able to do that in such a amount of time?
Yeah.
Well, and in total silence, whatever, and to go to that, because I mean, let's face it, if you and I cut somebody open, it's just a mass of organs, basically. So you would need to, it might sound stupid comparison, but it'd be like a mechanic looking under the hood of a car. They know exactly what they're looking for, and that's there. I'm having that and job done. I know that's a bit, no disrespect to the victims, but so I say that would lean towards somebody who had a lot of medical training that knew what they were.
Certainly, the Metropolitan Police, well, they made a hash of things, really. In fact, Sir Charles Warren he lost his job as a police commissioner. And the City of London Police were also very, very concerned about him not actually solving anything. And that's when Charles McNaughton came in from Scotland Yard, and he looked at all the suspects. But one person they were convinced may have been there with was a chap called John Druitt, and he was a failed medical student. His father had a practice just outside Whitechapel, and he was about 35 years of age. He had a hatred for women. He was openly gay, if you will, but had a hatred for prostitutes. But he would have also had access to medical equipment. And they believe that the knife he was using was actually almost like a surgical instrument, almost like dare I say, a mortician's knife, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
But he disappeared the same night that Margaret Kelly lost her life. The poor woman was probably terribly mutilated, and he just disappeared. But one person that was on the radar was a Romanian Jew called Aaron Kosminski, and he worked at the Spitalfields meat market, and he was a slaughterman, and he would have known how to move pigs' kidneys and other items as well. So he was also a chief suspect. But what we find so amazing, Scott, is that the fact that the man was never brought to justice makes the whole story even more exciting, really.
It does. I mean, I've been to London quite a few. I've never been to, the Whitechapel area, but I've been to London quite a few times. And But to get in the Whitechapel area and knowing that this guy was never caught and the mystery's still kind of open, it does kind of add that kind of spookiness to it. You know
Very
what I mean?
much so. Yeah.
You know, I've got to go to Kate's comment about the Jack the Ripper Museum near the Tower of London, all the artifacts. He felt uneasy inside, even though I was excited to go. It was oppressive in there. Turns out it's haunted. I've been to the Tower. I no doubt you have as well, Simon. Been to the Tower of London quite a few times.
Yes. Yeah.
And I can relate to what Kate's saying. I've not been to the Ripper Museum, but I've been into the Tower of London, and you know, you've got the graffiti on the wall, as I call it.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
And it's back to the like 1600s and stuff like that, you know. And I wouldn't say it makes me feel oppressed, but there's a certain atmosphere in there. Now, I don't know what is that in the mind, because you know the amount of people that were held in the tower.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
You know, what you know yourself, once you were into the tower, there was only one way you were coming back out, you know.
In a body bag.
In a bag, you know, in a box. You were not. I think very, very rarely anybody ever was released from the tour. Well, I know George Boleyn, he was released, Anne Boleyn's dad. He was released through the tour, and there was somebody else connected to Anne Boleyn who was released after. But the majority of people, you went out of the tower, that was it. You were losing your head, basically.
Yeah, I've always had a lot of respect, Scott, for the guards that are always based at the Tower of London, and of course they're even based in the early hours of the morning. The sentry boxes there. There was quite a touching report from 1931 of a Lance Corporal Rhys Evans of the Welsh Guards, and of course he's in the sentry box there early hours of the morning, and he did in fact see a figure glide towards him, which shocked him. And of course, he had to shout those famous words, "Who goes there?" And he could see a female figure that was going towards him. Now, he had a bayonet on the end of his rifle, and his job, of course, is to defend the tower. And he did, in fact, try and bayonet the character, but the bayonet went straight through, making no contact. He then literally fainted. And when the officer came round, he was literally on the floor, fast asleep. And he was about to be charged, but two of the lads inside the guard room had actually witnessed what was happening from a distance. And as a result, he was not court-martialed. He was put down to seeing a ghost of one of those poor characters that lost their lives there. I mean, a lot of people were actually hung, drawn and quartered at the Tower of London. And one man I feel a lot of compassion for was a gentleman called Nicholas Owen. And he was a priest-hole designer. In fact, some of his work is so good it hasn't been discovered. And you can pick up the national newspapers and hear of our cleaning ladies from Land's End to John O'Groats who work in our ancient halls, who've accidentally touched something, and a roof is lowered or a door's come from nowhere. Owen was actually using springs, slides, sprockets before they'd even been invented. He was a real hindrance to the Protestant authorities, and they put a wager in his head. And he was chased all over the country. He was finally captured at a place called Hinlip Hall in 1606 and sent to the Tower of London. And as you quite rightly say, Scott, you can see the graffiti on the walls there. You can see Anne Boleyn's handwriting. You can see Sir Walter Raleigh's handwriting. And just beneath that, you've got Lady Jane Grey, but also you've got Nicholas Owen. And he's scratching the wall, "This day I shall be with my father." Now, apparently, when he got to the Tower of London, he was told, if you just renounce your faith and become a Protestant, you can go home. But he wouldn't. And he died a martyr's death at the Tower of London. But he's scratched into the wall, "This day I shall be with my father." And you can see perspex glass actually over his writing, because it's really medieval graffiti of incredible importance, really.
That's basically what it is. It's usually medieval graffiti, and you think, you know, as you say, Anne Boleyn, Lady Jane Grey, you know, and this gentleman, he died for his beliefs. He was Thomas More. He refused to sign the oath to.
That's right. That's right. It must have been a very painful death, Scott.
Even though his family begged him, you know, just sign it. It's just a piece of paper, basically. You know, you don't have, just sign it and you'll be. But he was adamant, you know. And he ended up on the scaffold. You know, but I mean, the Tower of London is a fascinating place when you think. I mean, and also, you know, it was used for royal executions because you get Tower Hill and you Tyburn as well. If you were executed within the Tower, it was usually kept, well, back in Tudor times for just royal, basically, or people are hiking at office sort of thing. I think the last execution there was 1940, probably a date 42, I think it was.
A German prisoner.
A German prisoner, I parachuted in and
he was a spy, wasn't he? German spy. Yeah.
Landed in the wrong place, basically, didn't he?
Yeah.
He was off to, you're going to the Tower, pal, you know, and I think it was 1941 or 42.
Yeah.
He was executed by firing squad, and that was it. But it's a formidable building, and same as Jack the Ripper Museum. If I ever get back to London, we need to give it. I didn't even know there was a Jack the Ripper Museum. Did you?
No.
So just one last question. What is the eternal time's getting on, Simon? Just
yes,
talking about buildings and stuff. You know, the Kate was saying about the museum, and we're talking about Lancaster Castle.
Yes.
Obviously, you know, most famous as the Pendle Witches were held there, tried there, etc. You've been there many times. Is there the same kind of atmosphere at Lancaster Castle as you would compare maybe to what Kate was saying or to the Tower, you know?
Well, I find that the Tower a lot more, the atmosphere of the Tower is definitely very, very strong. I've been in what's called the Well Tower, which is a very, very deep underground dungeon at Lancaster. I've seen the actual floor where these poor Pendle witches were actually chained to the floor. But I didn't feel an atmosphere. I must be honest with you, Scott, I didn't feel an atmosphere. Although many, many people have lost their lives there. There's been executions at Lancaster City Castle on many occasions, and some pretty barbaric deaths as well, mainly due to Catholic priests, etc., that lost their lives there. One story which I did find quite intriguing, I'll be very, very quick, Scott, I know we haven't got much time, was a lady of the name of Mary Holden, and her only crime in life was a horrible husband who was really nasty, called Roger. And he was a heavy drinker, and he used to assault her nearly every night, and she thought, he's got to go. I can't knife him, I can't shoot him, but I can poison him. And she bought some strychnine, and in those days, strychnine was easily obtainable for killing rodents. And she put the strychnine in his afternoon tea, and he died. Now, the authorities arrived and they said, oh, yes, he's had a heart attack. But the inquisitive village Bobby sat down at the table and saw the teapot with a white ring around the spout, and he sniffed it. Strychnine. She was arrested, sent to Lancaster City Castle, and the jury felt sorry for her because she'd had a horrible marriage, a very cruel marriage. But the judge said, no, this is premeditated murder. And she became the very, very last female to be executed at Lancaster City Castle on the 14th of April, 1881. But her ghost does in fact haunt the area known as the Drop Room, which is a place I would not like to be by myself, Scott, I'll be honest with you. Particularly on a night like tonight, of course.
No, don't go alone. Just quickly before we pick this up, just jump back to the Tower. The place is going to sound stupid, but the place I found was most atmospheric was at Traitor's Gate. Now, I know it's not the original gates that are there, you know, because they've obviously been replaced, but it's still the original entrance. I found that to be quite solemn. You know, obviously, you've got the cells where Anne Boleyn's writing us, but Traitor's Gate standing there was quite solemn. And I thought maybe it's because, you know, a lot of people maybe didn't believe they were going to the Tower, but as soon as you went in Traitor's Gate, that was it. You know, you were there and the Tower was right in front of you. And I think that would create quite an atmosphere. And I felt that was kind of more intense there than it was in the actual cells sort of thing.
Yeah, your last place of freedom, really. Yeah.
Because once you went through that gate, that was it.
That's it. Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
but it's a beautiful building. You know, need to take you to London. Tell London, it's at Hampton Court Palaces. But I can talk all night with that, Simon.
Yeah, I'm sure, Scott. Yeah, sure.
The atmosphere inside the Great Gallery, even inside the archway, going out the entrance of the courtyard, that's what gets me. Just see when you think Henry VIII passed here, he walked here, he stood here, you know, all that kind of stuff. I don't doubt you're the same, but I'll hold on. You just have to come off, if that's all right for a wee minute, buddy. So I think we're going to wind up there, folks. A big thank you to Simon. You will be seeing him again because you've got a lot more stories to tell. But we've really enjoyed listening to him today. He always draws you in. That's what Laura was saying earlier on as well. I think Kate said it as well. There's one that Laura says you have a way of drawing you in and the emotion comes over. I think it's I don't know if you could I don't know if you could do an Australian accent either. That's the first thing.
Well, it's better than yours, certainly.
G'day, Spot. G'day. I can do an Australian accent.
That's it. Yeah.
You're welcome, Laura. Thank you, dear. So hold on. So a big thanks to Simon for coming in to see us. You will be seeing him again. And thanks to everybody. Thanks to Sarah for being here.
Thank you, Sarah.
Not very often.
I don't come on very many of these live, Simon. I must admit. So.
But we're going to wind up. We're back Thursday night with CRA, David Espinosa and Craig Arms. We'll be telling the journey so far of CRA, and then Saturday night it's our Xmas Live.
Yes, I might make an appearance.
Xmas show, and then next Monday we are rounding the year up with Patty Negri coming in. But so that's it for tonight, folks. Hope you enjoyed it. We certainly did. Massive thank you to Mr. Top Hat Tours. I was going to say Tails there again. What is it with me saying Tails? You know? And remind, we'll put the YouTube link up on the page so you can get in and see.
Thank you.
It really is fascinating. So take care, folks, and we'll see you on Thursday.
Yes.
Bye. Bye.
Bye-bye, folks.